Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Hilchot's Beit HaBechira, our study about the holy Mikdash, God's home. The more we study about this, the more we have a sense of familiarity. We kind of relate to it. And when you relate to something, it's a lot easier to yearn for it and to want it and to anticipate and hope for its return. Because, by the way, that's an important part of what we as Torah Jews are supposed to do, as I've been explaining in another series called Anticipate, especially during this time of the year. It behooves us to do everything possible to anticipate the coming of Mashiach and the rebuilding of the third and eternal Beit HaMikdash very speedily and in our days, amen, by studying about the Beit HaMikdash. Now, the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, has a great deal of information about it that's available to us. And the last chapter of the Rambam's Beit HaBechira is all about the Beit HaMikdash at night, when everybody was sleeping. So did the Mikdash sleep? Were things quiet? I mean, the simple answer is yes. The Mizbeach was piled high with whatever might have remained from the course of that day's offerings, and its fire would rage all night. But nobody was there to man the fire, so to speak. There was a fire burning at all times. But as we learned, the outer courtyard, which is called Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, as well as the perimeter of the Mikdash proper, was manned by Cohanim and Levites, a sum total of 24 watches. 3 of them are Cohanim groups, and 21 were comprised of groups of Levites. There were 18 groups around the parameters, and then 3 unique groups who were positioned in places where there was continuous action and activity during the course of the day. If you're joining for the first time, I have to tell you that you'll learn something tonight, but the previous lessons are extremely critical to help you appreciate and understand what we're going to learn, especially the episodes on chapter 8. In a word, we established the Maimonidean perspective on this guard duty, as the Rebbe illuminates it in an edited rumination. The Rebbe explains that the Rambam's view is that this guard duty was not about protection of the Beit HaMikdash, but rather ensuring mindfulness. That we, the Jewish people, had a duty, a responsibility to be mindful, to be thinking about the Beit HaMikdash at all times. And by virtue of our constant presence and mindfulness, the mindfulness was demonstrated by virtue of our presence, the Mikdash was properly honored and respected and held in the awe and esteem that it was due. And that has a lot to do with today's class, because on the surface, what we're going to be learning about today seems to be in the post-guard duty. It's like this is all over. Now the day is beginning. Well, if the day is beginning, it doesn't belong in the laws of Beit HaBechira, which are the simple laws of Beit HaMikdash itself. And this is the way the Beit HaMikdash is able to essentially continue to resonate with a sense of awe and respect from our perspective, because we never leave it bereft. We never turn our backs on the Beit HaMikdash. But once we get to the next day, that belongs in the daily schedule, which in the Rambam system is called the laws of Tmidim Umusafin. The things we do regularly and the things we do additionally. There's the regular schedule, and then there's special times, holidays. So really, why are we even talking about the next day? Why are we, in fact, breaking dawn when the mission of this particular watch was during the course of the night and not the next day? As the Rambam himself says, and we quoted this extensively, that the mitzvah of guarding the Beit HaMikdash is something that is supposed to be performed all night. The mitzvah is to guard the Beit HaMikdash at night, and therefore it lasts all night long. There's Cohanim, there's Leviim, and they have a job and a duty, and it's B'chol Laila, it's every night, and it has to be all night long. Well, if it has to be all night long, how do we understand Halacha Yud Aleph, where the Rambam tells us, B'shachar, in the morning, Kodem Sheyale Amud HaShachar, before the morning star rose, or dawn arrives, Samochlei, close to it. Yavai HaMemuna Shel Mikdash, the Mikdash Manager would arrive. V'yidfeik al HaKohanim, he'd knock on the Kohanim, who found themselves Beit HaMoked, in the house of the hearth. V'hein potchen lo, and they would open up. So there's a lot of things that have to be understood here. There's a lot of things that just ring very strangely. Firstly, when is Amud HaShachar? So this is really a subject for a different set of halacha, but let's just say this. When the sky begins to brighten, that means the darkness is not as intense anymore. That's because the rays of the sun are already beginning to project over the horizon. Slowly but surely, we stop seeing the stars. And our sky begins to reflect the oceans, and we have what we call light pollution. And as that happens, as the sky begins to lighten, the planet we call Venus, which in many ancient languages was called the morning star, including in ancient Persian, where the Jewish name, today's Jewish name, Esther, comes from ancient Persian, which was Istahar. She was a star. They called her a star. So her name was Hadassah, that was her Hebrew name. So this star, Venus, which is called a star in the vernacular, begins to glow very brightly. And it glows very brightly because all the other stars fade away. And it's, of course, our closest neighbor. So this this bright light of Venus, it happens about an hour and a fifth before sunrise. So for argument's sake, 72 minutes before the sun rises, dawn arrives. This is a discussion whether, according to the Rambam's opinion, the 72 minutes is always 72 minutes, or whether it's only at the spring and fall equinoxes, when the day is divided into 24 increments of exactly 60 minutes, of exactly 60 seconds, that's when it's 72 minutes. But at any rate, you get kind of the drift. So we're talking about that's daybreak. And by the way, there's a lot of halacha that rides on alot hashachar, on daybreak. Like on a fast day to when a person is allowed to eat and drink, or like when it comes to tefillah, when it comes to prayer, if a person is under duress and has to get on the road, when one is allowed to pray. There's a lot of things that kind of ride on alot hashachar, mitzvot that are day-bound. Everything from reciting the bracha on the lulav and etrog, to performing a Brit Milah. We're looking at daybreak, Alot HaShachar. We have to know when Alot HaShachar begins. And Alot HaShachar can be very, very early, depending on what time of the year it is and where in the world you're situated. So before, this is Kodem Sheyala Amud HaShachar. This is before dawn. So this is kind of breaking dawn or prior to dawn. And the Rambam says Kodem Sheyala, but Samuchlo, but very close to it. So dawn hasn't arrived yet, but it's very close to dawn. It's before dawn, but close to dawn. Yavo HaMemuna, the overseer comes. Now, if you watch the last 2 or 3 episodes, you'll know that there was an officer, an overseer, who was given extraordinary powers of enforcement. And his purview was to make the rounds during the course of the long night and ensure that everybody was awake and at their post. So you might think that this is the same fellow. So he's been walking around the perimeter of the Beit HaMikdash, walking around the outer perimeter of the Temple Mount. The perimeter of the Beit HaMikdash is around the outside, as we explained. And then there's the outer scrimmage of the Temple Mount, the inside of it, of course, as we learned. And he's calling upon these Leviim, the Levites, making sure they're awake. And if not, he gives them a drubbing or tortures them, or they can get into a lot of trouble for falling asleep, as we learned. Is it the same guy? Because he's not really referred to as Memuna. The Rambam never calls him Memuna Shel HaMikdash. He doesn't call him the manager or the appointee over the Mikdash. The Rambam calls him Ma'amidim Memuna Echad. We appoint an overseer. He doesn't say he's the Mikdash overseer. We appoint an overseer, Al Kol HaMishmarot. This is the way the last halacha begins, the 10th halacha begins. We appoint an overseer over the watches. And he's called Ish Har Habayit, the man of the Mikdash. But he's not called the Mumuna. He's not called the manager. He's not the appointee. He's not the chief executive officer per se. Here, we're talking about Memuna al HaMikdash, the overseer, the appointee, the Mikdash Manager. So, very interestingly, if you take a look at the Rambam's Hilchot Tmidim Umusafin, the schedule, the daily schedule in the Beit HaMikdash, in the beginning of the 6th chapter, the Rambam says, Seder Avodot HaTmidot B'chol Yom Kachu. This is how the daily schedule in the Beit HaMikdash would unfold. Samuch la'alot HaShachar, close to Alot HaShachar, Yavo HaMemuna, the appointee, the manager, would come. And the Rambam uses the words, Sha'al HaPiyosos. Piyosos was a lottery, because the division of responsibility to Cohanim happened by virtue of lottery, and that's a subject for a different day. And Yakish al Ha'azorah, he would bang on the courtyard, Upotchen lo, and they would open for him. So the commentaries here in the Rambam say, well, clearly the Rambam is talking not about the person whose responsibility was to make sure that the watches were at their appointed positions and doing their job, but rather we're talking about somebody else here. We're talking about the Memuna ala Piyosos. Okay, so I like to think about things. I start to think. Help me understand this. If his name is Memuna ala Piyosos, then why in the laws of Beit HaBechira is he called Memuna ala Mikdash? Like, why do we give him different names? If the same Rambam and a different set of halacha calls him Memuna ala Piyosos, why wouldn't he call him Memuna ala Piyosos here too? Spare us the confusion. That's the first question I had. And then as I continued to kind of analyze these two halachot, which seem to be saying the same thing side by side, namely the 11th halacha, the 11th paragraph of the 8th chapter of Hilchot Beit HaBechira, the laws of the Beit HaMikdash, and the beginning of the 6th chapter of the laws of Tmidim Umusafin, the daily schedule and the exceptional holiday schedule in the Beit HaMikdash, I noticed something else. In laws of Beit HaBechira, the Rambam says, Kodem sheya'aleh Amud hashachar samuch lo. Before day would break, close to it, but close to it. So before, we're emphasizing here before day would break, but close to it. However, in the laws of the Mikdash schedule, the Rambam says simply, samuch la'alot hashachar, close to daybreak. Close to daybreak is obviously before daybreak. Rambam himself makes a lot of hay out of not making a lot of hay. He says that the definition of Mishnah is few words with a lot of ideas, a lot of content. Less verbiage, more content. That's the definition of Mishnah. The Rambam named this halachic work Mishnah Torah. There are many reasons why the Yada Chazakah of the Rambam is called Mishnah Torah. But if it's called Mishnah, well, then it has to be Mishnah. By Rambam's own metrics, it would have to be a lot of ideas, but sparing on the verbiage. So it makes sense to say, Samuch la'alot hashachar, that's 3 words. Instead, here, the Rambam uses 5 words. Kodem sheya'aleh. He's not speaking about Amud hashachar as a noun, but rather he's speaking about the verb. Over there, alot, samach le'alot, close to the rise. Close to the rise as a noun. Here it's kodem sheya'aleh, before it will rise. Amud hashachar. So the Amud hashachar is the same. And here he uses Amud hashachar, and there he just says hashachar. So what the Rambam accomplished in 3 words, instead here he's accomplishing in 5 words. Adding the word kodem, whereas over there he just says samach. Adding the word amud, and necessarily having to use the word sheya'aleh, which is the same amount of letters, but it's a different word. Not a noun, but a verb. And then he anyway says the word samuch lo is actually using 6 words. It's 3 extra words. I'm like, something doesn't seem to make sense here. And then he calls him Yavo Memune al Mikdash, or Shel Mikdash. But there he just says Memune Sha'ala Payasot. Why does he change the verbiage, the names? I noticed something else that started to drive me crazy. Here in Hilchot Beit HaBechira it says the Yid folk. And in 6th chapter of Tamidim Umusafim it says V'yakish. Same Rambam, same narrative, different words. The Rambam in the laws, in his Pirush HaMishnayot, because this is ultimately taken from a Mishnah. It's the Mishnah in the beginning of the 1st chapter of Masechet Tamid, 2nd Mishnah. So the Rambam says, Lashon dofek, mora al hamakish, bepetach, benachat. Softly knocking. A soft knock. Kimo, for example, in the Song of Songs, Kol Dodi Dofek, the sound of my beloved is knocking, but it's a faint sound. And the inamorata or object of his love is in bed. She's gone to sleep. She's washed her feet, proverbially speaking. She's under her covers, and she says, I'm already in bed. She says, how am I going to get dressed and go downstairs? And there's this soft knock, and it's raining outside. It's inclement weather, and it's raining. Anyway, that's a whole nother story of it, until she finally pulls herself out of bed, and then he's gone. That's a metaphor. Hashem is knocking. Hashem doesn't usually hit us over the head with a 2x4. He knocks softly. We're supposed to get the message. All right, so the word dofek clearly has a specific meaning. And interestingly enough, the Rambam uses the terminology dofek here. He says, V'yidfok ala delet. It's true, the Mishnah uses that verbiage, bo v'dofek. But the Rambam in Laws of Tmidim, which are taken from Masechet Tamid, makes a point of saying, v'yakish. He bangs. Here it says, dofek al ha-kohanim. He bangs on the Kohanim. What does that even mean? How do you bang on the Kohanim? You obviously can't bang on the Kohanim. It doesn't mean to bang on the Kohanim. So, I mean, the Tiferes Yisrael says, makesh means he uses the Rambam's definition. He says, benachat, al delat shel Beit HaMoked, umilat aleihen, on them, Ritzon Olomar, that means to say, avuran, says the Tiferet Yisrael. It means on their behalf. He's knocking for them. So what does this mean, he's knocking for them? Why is he knocking lightly for them? So this is discussed by different Mefarshim. The Derech Chochma says like this. He says, if you may remember, and if you don't, go back and look. We talked about the Beit HaMoked. By the way, the Beit HaMoked is right here. It's called the House of the Hearth. And on the first floor, there was a fire burning, like a fire in the hearth. And it's 2 floors high. And there was elder Kohanim. The mature Kohanim are sleeping upstairs. You know, this could be like 3 o'clock in the morning. So the younger Kohanim, they're awake. So he's standing outside at this door. This is the Har HaBayit. This is outside the Azara. No Levi is stationed here, and no Levi is stationed here, because there was young Kohanim studying Torah here all night. And there was Kohanim sleeping. Maybe some of them were awake. That's a discussion in the Beit HaMoked. In between these two structures, there is a little door, and there was a Levi station there. And you can see that here, this larger circle is the Beit HaMoked, and you can see the 4 ventricles. This is the Beit HaNitzutz, that's the small area, but this is an aerial view, and you can see here is the door, the gateway, leading into the Azara, and that's where special korbanot were brought in, and they were brought to the area where the korbanot were slaughtered and butchered, right here. This is called Tzafon, this is called the north. So this is the Holy of Holies, the Holy, this is the structure of the Beit HaMikdash, this is the courtyard, and that's the Beit HaMoked. So this door knocking is happening right here. Right here. The Mikdash Manager comes and he's knocking on this door. Let's go back to this picture. He's standing outside here. This is a massive door, by the way. It's like 20 feet high, or 30 feet high. He's standing out here and he's knocking. He's knocking softly because he doesn't want to wake up the Kohanim who are sleeping up here, but he wants to make the Kohanim down here aware of that it's time. So he's knocking on the door over here. Now, here's the most fascinating thing. In the laws of Beit HaBechira, it says that the Mamuna comes, v'yidfok al ha-kohanim, he's coming and he's knocking for the Kohanim to get their attention. Which Kohanim? Shebebeit HaMoked, who are in this house. Vehein, and they are inside, potchin lo. Because the Beit HaMikdash is locked all night. The whole Beit HaMikdash is locked. And this door is also locked. Nobody can get into the Beit HaMikdash at night. It's empty. The Levites are guarding out here, outside the door here, at a corner here, at a corner here, at a doorway back here, at a doorway, a hole in the back, one over here, 2 doorways here actually. So it's 1 in the back, 2 here, 1 here, and then 1 here at the doorways. And then on 4 corners. But the Mikdash itself is locked, like Fort Knox. This Memuna, Mikdash Manager, shows up here and he's knocking on the Beit HaMoked. The Azara is here. That's the Beit HaMoked. Here's the Azara. So here he says he's knocking at the Beit HaMoked. That kind of makes sense. But if you look at the laws of Tamidim of the Rambam says, Yakish, he's banging al ha'azara. Hey, 1 second. The Azara is inside here. This is a big building. This is a big building. It's got 4 major centers in it. So if this is a big building, And he's knocking at the door here. What do you mean, Yakish Alo Azara? What does that even mean? How's he banging on the Azara? He's a building away from the Azara. Yes, this is built onto the Azara, but he's knocking here. Shocking. And yet here the Rambam says he's softly knocking, and here he's banging. Here he says he is knocking al ha-Kohanim. Here he says he's banging on the Azara, which means for the purpose of the Azara, but there's nobody in the Azara. I'm like, I can't believe this. There's like 6 differences between these two narratives. It's the same Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon Asfardi. What's going on here? So Vahein Potchon, they open up for him. Okay, you got in. Now what do? Oh, now that he got in, he said the first order of business is he has to take the key. Not less maftech. And we talked about this earlier, where exactly was the key. It seems that in the middle of the Beit HaMoked, there was a stone that had a little chain. You lifted up the stone, and this large key was hanging in there. So he takes the key. And he didn't have a key. He had to get the key. And he couldn't get the key until he got into the Beit HaMoked. So he got into the Beit HaMoked, and under this dome somewhere there's a key. So he gets the key, lifts it out of the ground. He's got the secret hiding place. He's got the key. Now that he has the key, now what happens? Not l'samafteach uposach es hasha'ar hakoton shebein Beit HaMoked ubein hazora. Once he got the key, he opened the little door. Now, the little door, that's a big door. A very big door. It's 20 amot wide, 30 amot wide, 20 amot high. It's a huge door. But there's a little door. So what's this little door? So the Rambam, in his commentary on the Mishnah, he says that this is what we find in the Gemara, in Masechet Tamid. It says it was a pish cotton. And the best translation I found for it is a wicket. There's a wicket door, like a door within a door, the Rambam says. What happened was, pish cotton was bitoch guf petach gadol. In the midst of a large door, there was a mini door. One of the doors had a little door in it. Kigun elu hanikroyim, and he gives us some kind of Arabic word, which I'm going to guess in English is what we would call today a wicket. Umah sha'amar elu holchin ve'elu holchin, he means they follow him into the Beit HaMikdash. So he's knocking on this door out here, comes into this building, lifts up a tile. He's got a key hanging down inside there. And then there's a large gateway between this building and the Azara. And what he does is he opens the mini gateway, the little door within that large door. So within that large door, there was a wicket door that opened. And the Rambam tells us that he goes in there. Patach et shara katon shebeit Beit HaMoked ben Azara v'nichnas. And the manager now enters mi Beit HaMoked la'Azara. He goes from the Beit HaMoked into the Azara. This is the first time somebody has been entering the Azara. Nobody's been in the Azara yet. And now that he has opened the door, which was hanging on a ring in the chamber of the hearth. So now that he opens that small door, which, as I said, the Gemara in Talmud on page 28, side A, and Daf Chav Ches says that was a small wicket door that was inside the large gate. The Rambam clearly says it was not next to it, but inside the gate, inside the large door, which means that the large door doesn't get opened until daybreak. And it's interesting that the Tiferes Yisrael says, and the Rambam mentions this actually earlier, he says that the large gate, the large doors are not opened until we actually begin the service in the Beit HaMikdash. And the large door being opened is this door, the Shar Nikanor, which we talked about. So this it's still in the middle of the night. The day hasn't started yet. The Mikdash is not open for business. Some Cohanim have entered by virtue of a wicket, but the Mikdash is still closed. And then the Cohanim are going to follow the manager in here, and they're going to begin a walkaround. Nichnasu acharav hakonim, acharav hakonim. The kohanim follow him in, and they're going to begin their walkaround. So the obvious question is, what in heaven is going on over here? Something doesn't seem to make any sense. By the way, who were these kohanim? So the Tiferes Yisrael says, Kol ha-kohanim shebebeit ha-moked. These were the kohanim, all the kohanim who had already shetovlu, who had already immersed in a mikveh. V'lovshu bigdei kahuna. They had already put on their priestly raiments. Beini o beini nichnas acharav. If they have managed to pull that off, and they would guys were very fast. You know, it's like military people who can be up and dressed, you know, a weapon in hands within something like 120 seconds. So he'd start knocking on the door, and maybe these guys got up before, maybe they got up, and then very quick. Seems like they got up before his knocking, because they had to go to mikveh. How quick? I mean, it still takes time to go to mikveh and dry yourself and put on your clothes. But it was very, very quick. They were very swift, and by the time he was knocking for them, and they would open the door for him, there was already a group of kohanim that he had mustered actually on their own, and they followed him, into the Azara. Okay, so let's go back to my original question. What in heaven is this doing in the laws of Beit HaBechira? This is laws of Tamidim u'Musafim. This is like a different set of laws. This is how the daily schedule in the Beit HaMikdash begins. This is the laws of guarding the Beit HaMikdash. Here our concern is the idea that the Beit HaMikdash has to be guarded all night long. And we talked about this, that the Shmirah of the Beit HaMikdash was an all-nighter. It was an all-nighter. Where's that language here? All right, you're going to have to trust me. I'm telling you it says it. I don't know if he uses the exact verbiage. He says it lasted all night long. The mishmar went all night long. Oh, here it is. In the beginning of Halacha Beis. V'shmira zo, and this shmira, mitzvata, its mitzvah, is kol halayla, all night. So, all night means until alot hashachar, until dawn or day breaks. But if day didn't break it, if dawn didn't break it, if we're breaking dawn, we're here before dawn, so there's still a mitzvah of Shmirah. So what are we talking about? So why is this even happening here? This seems to be almost be like invading a separate mitzvah, the mitzvah of Shmirah. And if they have to prepare and do whatever they have to do in the Beit HaMikdash, that's fine. But what's the point of emphasizing the fact that they were coming prior to dawn's breaking? So the thing is like this. There actually is one answer to all of these questions. Everything is explained with the same concept. And this is based on that amazing Sikha from the Rebbe that's found in the Likutei Sichos Chelik Yud Gimel. Here in that edited talk, it's in Parshas Kohanim on page 62, there's a footnote. And the footnotes in Likutei Sichos were almost always written actually by the Rebbe, not just edited. So the Rebbe says that it's interesting to kind of analyze this. Yesh la'ayin, he says, when it says that the mitzvah is all night long, does that mean until the beginning of the Korban Tamid? Or is it until the Memuna begins to wake the people up? Or, the Rebbe says, is it until the Trumat Hadeshen, before the formal service in the Beit HaMikdash should begin, ash would be removed from the Mizbeach? And the Rebbe notes here that Zman Boi HaMemuna, the arrival of the manager, the appointee, was Koidim Alois HaShachar, before day broke, but Samoch, like close to it. And the Rebbe says Trumas Hadeshen, the taking of ash, lifting of ash, was the first thing done in the Beit HaMikdash, and it wasn't even a formal act of service, kind of a semi-formal act of service. That can only happen Misheyala amud hashachar, only after day has broken. And yet here we're talking about what happens before day broke. So the Rebbe says it's really interesting that here we're talking about kodem sheyala, before the morning star rises. Then Mamuna comes. And then they follow him into the courtyard of the Azara. And the Rebbe says, did you notice that the Rambam puts that in the end of the laws of Beit HaBechira as a conclusion of the laws of the Shmirah? And the Rebbe says, but the Shmirah has to be all night. So this got me thinking. And I started to realize, this is exactly the point. As we have established, the concept of the Shmirah of the Mikdash is all about mindfulness. And this area of the Beit HaMoked had Cohanim inside it, and they were minding the Mikdash. The moment the Memuna comes, and he is mustering the Cohanim, he's getting the key, he's mustering the Cohanim, and they're going to be entering in through a pish-pish, through a wicket, and then they're going to be doing a walkaround around the Azara. They come in over here in the smaller door, and they're going to be walking around. We'll talk about that in the next episode. This is not the service of the Beit HaMikdash. This is not the daily service. This is the conclusion of the Shmirah. This is still part of the Shmirah. The Cohanim and the Beit HaMoked are doing the Shmirah in a little bit of a different way now. In other words, the Shmirah, the mindfulness ends when the Cohanim are inside the Beit HaMoked, are now entering into the courtyard, and they're doing a walk around, and that's all part of the mindfulness. This is the conclusion of that mindfulness. And that's why it says Kodim Sheyala. Here the Rambam has to emphasize before the day breaks. Before, we have to break the dawn. Don't wait for dawn to break. We have to break it. Why do we have to break it? Samachlo, close to it, because the way the Shmirah ends is by an active role played by the Kohanim, where they're walking around the Azara. It has to be night still, because remember, this mitzvah is Kol Halayla, and it's still night now. So the Memuna comes to the Mikdash, Yidfok al HaKohanim. Here the emphasis is he's knocking softly. He's not beginning the day. He's getting the Kohanim's attention. He doesn't want to wake up the Kohanim upstairs. They're performing their act of mindfulness by just being present in a dormitory of Kohanim. But he is actually trying to engage these Kohanim, the Defeka. It's not about making noise. It's about catching somebody's attention. And where are they? In the Beit HaMoked, where they have a position to take up for Shmirah. In the laws of Hilchot Tmidim and Musafim, the Rambam doesn't have to tell you that Kodem Sheyala. He says, Samoch la'alot hashachar, stuff's already happening. Activities are already beginning. Samoch la'alot hashachar, the Memuna she'ala piyasas. Memuna she'ala piyasas here means here his responsibility, the emphasis here is on the piyasas, on the lottery, on the division of responsibilities. In Hilchot Beit HaBechira, the emphasis is on the fact that he is Memuna al HaMikdash. He's appointed over minding the Mikdash. His first act is to call the Kohanim who have been minding the Mikdash, and he gets them to follow him into the final act of homage, of honor, of respect, of mindfulness in the Beit HaMikdash. So he knocks for them, ve'hein potchin lo. He knocks to get their attention, and they open for him. That's not relevant in the laws of Tmidim and Musafim, because that's about the schedule. So here, it just says, Yakish al ha'azara. Where does the services begin? The services don't happen in the Beit HaMoked. The services happen in the Azara. Beit HaMoked is an ancillary building. It's not actual Mikdash. It's you can call it Azara, the Mefarshim say, because half of this was in the area of the holy, the scrimmage of the holy. And so this area, Beit HaMoked, it says there was like these little markers, demarcation. And these little markers that were placed along the ground, raised little stones, told you where this was the Kedusha of Azara and where this was Har HaBayit. Here there was Mikdash sanctity, here is the temple mountain sanctity, and the different levels of sanctity. But the point here is that he's awakening or inspiring or getting the attention of the people in the Beit HaMoked. In the laws of the daily schedule, it's not about Beit HaMoked, it's about Azara. And you can't say softly knocking because you're kind of distanced. You're outside a building here and you're trying to get your attention here. So the yakish, she's emphasizing the banging. It doesn't matter if nobody hears the banging. He's banging on the azara. So what if nobody hears the banging? There's nobody inside the azara anyway. But the point is that it's a banging on the azara. He's stimulating, initiating, starting the process of work in the azara. It's unbelievable. With this yesod, with this perspective or this idea that the Rebbe establishes, this jurisprudence, everything fits perfectly. All the changes make sense. So that's why the Rambam uses this kind of verbiage. And what does he do? He takes the key. He opens the small gate. No, it's not the service yet. It's a small gate. And he's entering in for the final act of mindfulness. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about that final act of mindfulness. So how does that mindfulness come to its climax? And the moment it comes to its climax, immediately, without any hesitation, without any kind of delay, the mindfulness leads to activity, which is mindfulness. When we're working in the Beit HaMikdash, we don't need the mindfulness. So that's when the Shmirah ends. You know when the Shmirah ends? The Shmirah ends when people are actually starting to do something again. Once we have people working in the Beit HaMikdash again, then the Beit HaMikdash is being minded. Anyway, this is it's fantastic. It all fits together beautifully, and it helps us appreciate the concept of mindfulness and Mikdash. And I'm just going to reiterate, as I've done so many times over the last couple of episodes, our learning is an act of mindfulness. We cannot have the privilege yet of being in the Beit HaMikdash, but we can talk about the Beit HaMikdash. We can think about the Beit HaMikdash. We can mind the Beit HaMikdash. And this is how we participate in the actual building of the Beit HaMikdash. May Hashem have mercy on us. May Mashiach finally come and bring us home to the third Beit HaMikdash, b'mheira, u'biyameinu, amen. Thank you. I really appreciate you joining tonight. And I hope you'll continue to join us as we virtually build the future Beit HaMikdash, and accelerate the process of Mashiach's arrival through our added level of yearning and anticipation. May we merit to see that great day, b'mheira u'biyameinu, speedily and in our days. Amen. Thank you. Have a beautiful night.